Welcome back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. I'm your host, Life Coach Myrna Young, and sitting in the guest chair today is Dr. Frank L. Douglas. Dr. Douglas and I are going to be talking on the topic applying a productive process to reduce personal pain from systemic discrimination. Welcome, Dr. Frank.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. And I'm so psyched for this interview, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let me just share a brief introduction to Dr. Douglas. Frank L. Douglas, PhD, MD, is the founder and CEO of Safe Haven Dialogues. Prior to establishing Safe Haven Dialogues, he spent many years as a leader in global pharmaceutical companies, where he led teams of scientists that discovered, developed, and are brought to market more than 25 drugs for the treatment of diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, and cancer. In 2018, he published his memoirs entitled Defining Moments of a Free Man from a Black String. In his memoirs, Dr. Douglas describes his childhood growing up in poor circumstances in Guyana and the transition to dealing with racism in academia and industry in the United States. He was the first Black to be a member of the board management of a global pharmaceutical company. He has received many awards, including the Black History Makers Award in 2007 and the University of West Indies Luminary Award. He performed his residency in internal medicine at the Johns Hopkins Hospital and a fellowship in neuroendocrinology, yeah, I said that word, at the National Institute of Health. All right, well, you guys have been listening to my podcast. It starts off by saying, I was born in Guyana and I grew up poor. But what makes this interview so fascinating is Dr. Douglas seems to have the same trajectory of his life story as that of my dad. My dad, like Dr. Douglas, grew up in Guyana during poor circumstances. I like the way you phrased that. My dad, by the way, is Dr. Walter Edwards. And he came to the U.S. To teach at a university. So he transitioned from Guyana to academia as well. And I'm almost sure that he encountered racism because he's very militant about, the Black experience. So I am so curious, Dr. Douglas, to hear of your story. Tell me about, the background in Guyana and how you came to transition from Guyana to academia in the United States.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It is such a long time ago, but nonetheless vivid in my mind. I grew up with a single mother. There were 5 of us, my mother and 4 siblings, so a total of 6 of us actually. And we lived in one room with a detached bathroom, detached kitchen that was shared by others in the yard, as we would call it, who lived in this one room.
Where did you grow up, by the way? What city?
In Georgetown.
Province?
Right.
You're in Georgetown?
Yes.
I was in Georgetown too. What part of Georgetown?
You know the Promenade Gardens? You know,
is
where
that the back of Lodge somewhere? I grew up in Lodge, no, so it's pretty close, right?
It's not so far,
right?
But I grew up not far from Government House on Carmichael Street.
Okay, yes, I know that. All right, okay, keep going.
Yes, and so there we were. I had a critical moment when I was 12, actually. Because my aunt, I had a couple of aunts, aunts and two cousins and grandmother and grandfather, and they lived in two other of these small rooms. And it was my job on a Saturday to go to Border Market. I don't know if you remember Border Market.
Of course. Went
Yes,
there all the time.
yes, there you go. It was my job on a Saturday morning to go to Border Market to buy the rations, food for the week. This particular Saturday, I was excited because I had gotten a bicycle. And so I went to Border Market, got the goods, was very happy, riding back, came into Murray Street where I lived, and turned into the yard. It sloped downwards, and just as I turned in, it suddenly occurred to me that it's all sandy, and before I knew it, I had a spill. And everything fell. I had cooking oil, you know about cooking oil,
Right.
in the bag. And so, you know, the flour, the rice, everything.
Wow.
And I picked up what I could, you know, the cassava and plantains, of course, they were fine. And by the time I got to the little room, my mother began to whip me furiously with a fury I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And she said that my aunt told her that she saw me purposefully push the bag off the handlebars because I was unhappy I had to go to the marketplace.
Oh, wow.
Now, this particular aunt, and I do not know why, would tell these tales on me, and I would always get a whipping from my mother.
Wow.
I was so distraught after this that I actually decided that I would go and drown myself. So I left and I walked to the seawall, which was about a mile from where I lived, and got onto the jetty and stood there. And frankly, as I looked at these large boulders and rocks with the barnacles and the slime on it, and I began to envision, you know, stepping on, slipping, and the water coming and drowning. And the thought of drowning so scared me that I changed my mind and returned home. Now, that was a turning point because as I walked back home, I was filled with so much hatred and so many ugly thoughts of what I would do to my aunt if I ever got an opportunity, that I decided there and then to give my heart to the Lord and to become a Christian. At the time, I went to an evangelical church. So I actually went to the minister, Brother McInnes, as we call him, he's since deceased. And that was the turning point in my life, because thereafter, I became a model student, a top student. In fact, at age 14, there's an exam we have in Guyana at that time. The exams were all done either with London or Oxford or Cambridge. You went on a particular day or 2 days, took the exams, they sent.
Well, there were two exams. I took one at 10, which was common entrance, and then the other was GCE. So which one did you talk about at 14?
Well, before the GCE, there were actually a number of them around that age of 16, 17, 15, 16, 17. One was called College of Preceptors, which was a pre-exam either to the GCE or the Senior Cambridge, which was the same level as the GCE. And the high school that I went to took the Senior Cambridge. Okay. So it turns out that if you did well at a Senior Cambridge and you were 15 or younger, you got, and I think the top 5 students got a scholarship to go to Queen's or Bishop's if you did not get in at
I remember that. I wanted to go to Queen's or Bishop's. I ended up at Christ Church. But anyway, yes.
I actually went to Christ Church Elementary School. Look at that. I live not far from Christ Church. So you went to Christ Church?
Yeah, I went to Christ Church, right.
So I actually gained the first place in both of these exams. Wow. And got a scholarship to go to Queen's College. So I went to Queen's College. Wow. And a year after I finished Queen's College, one day I got a call from the USIS library people, and I showed up, and they said, you have been awarded a Fulbright scholarship to go to America and study. Now, as you well know, most of us, if we didn't get a scholarship to go abroad and study, because at that time we did not have University of Guyana, that came about 3 or 4 years after I left. If you didn't, you worked a few years, saved some money, then you went abroad and studied. So I had started working in this one. And that's how I came to America on a Fulbright scholarship.
You came very early. You said 18?
Actually, I was 20 because I worked a couple of years. Yes.
Okay.
When I finished Queen's College, I worked 1.5 years. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's beautiful. So let me circle back. So you said that when you decided to give your life to the Lord, somehow that equated to you being a better student. Bridge the gap there. How did those two things connect?
It suddenly focused me. In fact, I actually became a boy preacher. It focused me. I started paying attention to schoolwork, paying attention to the Bible. I mean, at that time, actually, they used to have something called Youth for Christ, and the high schools would compete. And I was actually the champion quizzer. It was Bible quiz. I was a champion quizzer. Because I would spend time just learning verses, etc. Similarly, in fact, what actually happened when I went to high school, and the way I ended up going to high school, was a very good friend of my mother. I was 12, too old now for another shot at the common entrance, which means I would have had to stay in the sixth grade it was, for 3 years until I became 15 or 16 to take school leaving exams. This friend came to my mother and said, this does not make sense to have, this boy just sitting there. He's a bright little boy. I will pay for him to go to high school, because to go to the high school, you either got a scholarship or you had to pay.
Right.
And so that's how I ended up going to high school. And as it turned out, I did so well the very first year that the principal, very lovely man, great man, he offered me a scholarship for the rest of the time. Now, one of the
beautiful things about Guyana that I don't think happens in the other, even though we call ourselves Caribbean, but we're really not Caribbean, we're South American. But if I were to compare it to Jamaica, I don't know about Barbados, but I know about Jamaica, the education system in Guyana is 100 times better, and that is basically why you can get out of poverty. Education is what my father always taught me to get out of poverty. Now, he didn't leave that early, and was not as lucky as you. He did go to teachers college. And I'm not sure what his story is. I have to ask him, how did he get to come to the United States? But when he came to the United States, he came as a teacher at Wayne State University, and he's still there. He must have come, I don't know. I think I was 16. So he had to come in maybe, the 70s. Right. He came in the 70s, and like I mentioned, my dad is 82, and he's still teaching at Wayne State University. He's now the assistant dean and getting ready to retire. But so that is amazing with parallels. And of course, he had kids and everything before he left, so he had me and a couple others. But so I just wanted to understand that. Now, when I went to school, we only had the 2 exams. We had the common entrance, which I took at 10 and passed. And then, in my day, if you failed the common entrance and you had to stay in school, let's say you took it at 10, I think you couldn't do the GCE again until you're 16. So you're right. There's just wasted time there. You said 3 years, according to me, but you can take the common entrance all the way until 12. So let's say you took it at 12 and you failed, then you got to wait until you're 15 or 16, I think, in order for you to take the GC. But my dad went to Oxford to get his PhD.
Mhm.
Don't even know how that happened. Maybe I need to bring him on my show.
Yeah, no, you should. You should.
Yeah, but he got his PhD in London, and obviously it was a scholarship of some sort. Yeah, so all right. So that's amazing. So you came here at 20
Yes.
and went into academia. So did you went to you went straight through to get your PhD and then
No, no,
started teaching? Or
no,
you're not teaching though, are you?
no, I'm
You're
retired
into
now.
pharmaceutical, right? Okay.
Yeah, but I wouldn't know. But I was in academia. I was a professor.
Okay.
But I came as an undergraduate. I went to Lehigh University
Okay.
to do my bachelor's in engineering.
Okay.
And after I completed that, I then went to Cornell and did a PhD and an MD.
Okay.
And this was after the MD. As a matter of fact, after my MD and fellowship in the neuroendocrinology that you said so well, I actually
Thank
was
you.
I was an assistant professor of medicine and in charge of hypertension at the University of Chicago, Pritzker School of Medicine. And
Okay.
I was there for 2-3 years when I was discovered by the pharmaceutical industry, and I changed to the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay. All right. So when did you first encounter racism? Because I know coming from a lot of people say when they come to the United States, or yeah, let's say United States, but even North America. When I immigrated from Guyana, I went to Canada, and the discrimination and the racism, we're going to separate those two words. It's a little, it's not as in your face. It's maybe covert. But a lot of people say, I think I was reading, yes, I was listening to or watching the documentary of Sidney Poitier, and he came from the Bahamas. And one of the first things he said, like in the Bahamas, everybody's Black, right? And then he went to Miami, where people are telling him, you can't go here and you can't go there because you're Black. And it was really, it was really like, oh my gosh. Because before someone points it out to you, you don't even look at yourself as Black, right? You're just blending in. But then someone says to you, you can't go here, you're Black, or they discriminate against you because you're Black, then it's in your face and now you see it. So what was the experience for you when you came to America and noticed that people were discriminating against you because you're a Black man?
It was fascinating for me because I came in 1963, 8 days before Martin Luther King's march in Washington.
Yeah.
And I was at Yale on an orientation program for Fulbright scholars. And one day I awoke, which was 3 days before the march, actually. I awoke with this severe pain in my scrotum. And that day I was supposed to give a presentation. Mm-hmm. And so I went early to the lecture hall and actually room to see the professor. I saw him and I explained to him that I really needed to go to the hospital. I didn't know why I had this pain. And I was stunned when he said to me, you Blacks are always finding excuses. Yeah. And now that you are a Fulbright scholar, you're going to have to learn to work hard to deserve that honor. Oh, wow. Well, fortunately, I left and went to one of the directors who immediately got me to the hospital. I was in the Yale hospital for 10 days, in fact. You're kidding? So it was serious. Wow. Yeah, the doctor said, why did you not bring this man here earlier than this? So I learned what Martin Luther King talked about 3 days later when he said that what he hopes is that his young children would be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. Oh, that's so beautiful. And here I was being judged by the color of my skin. Now, thereafter, I then began to recognize that there were some churches I could not visit because I was Black. Now, that was, again, very strange to me because, as I told you, I grew up in the evangelical church and we all were going to go to heaven
Yeah,
as long as we were children of God, etc.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
yeah,
how come I can't go to church with white people?
yeah,
So that started my introduction to the awful reality of racism and the discrimination generally in America. Because, I use the term discrimination because it's not only
Black people.
against your ethnicity, it's also against your gender, it's against your sexual orientation, against your religion. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. You know that you're talking about 63, and this is how America is going so slowly. But one of the things people say is that 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated place in America because the churches, you're right, very few of them still don't commingle, right? It's either a black church or a white church. They're still segregated, right? They can't tell you you can't come in, but you come in and you're not really welcome. But yes, they're still segregated. Wow. Okay. Um, so these were, this was a church, and this was, people labeling you, black people are lazy kind of thing. That's probably what the guy was saying. But in academia, you were a professor. You were supposed to be the top of the chain. How did it show up there?
Well, the way it shows up, well, it showed up along the way to get to the top of the chain. When I was an undergraduate, I remember it was near the final of the biochemistry exam. I'd taken the final, and I stayed in my room because I was not feeling well. And one of my friends, at that time, they used to give you your little booklet, with your exam. And he had collected my booklet for me to bring it to me. And he came to me and he said, "You should never ask this professor." I was in my senior year. He said, "You should never ask this professor for a recommendation." And I said, "Well, why would you say that?" He said, "Well, remember, he said that if you got this extra problem right, you would get an extra 5 points. Well, you got it right, and he didn't give you the extra 5 points. I was going through your paper." So I went to him and I pointed out that he had made an error, and you should have had over 100, and you didn't get over 100 because he didn't add the 5 points.
Right.
And he said, and I wouldn't say his name, but I remember his name. He said to my friend, "I don't care what Douglas gets on an exam, he will never become a scientist."
You would never become what?
A scientist.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
I was a chemistry major.
Wow.
And so he warned me. He said, "Do not ever ask him for a recommendation."
Wow.
But prior to
Yeah.
that, I had a couple of episodes where I was given a lower grade than I had actually earned. And when
Wow.
I challenged the professors to understand why, I never got a good answer.
Yeah.
One said some
Yeah.
behavioral
Yeah.
type.
You're getting into some muddy waters here. Yes. The discrimination of the Black man is probably the biggest discrimination in the United States. So, yes. So, yeah, you're getting, obviously you talk about it in your book, which is beautifully titled. So that's amazing. So, why is it that you are so concerned about systemic discrimination? I like that word systemic because my pastor always preaches on it. Systemic discrimination, systemic racism, systemic. And from what he teaches, systemic comes from the top down, like from the government. Is that the way you are looking at it too?
Yes, and also it's around for such a long time and has become such a habit that it's in the body system,
Yes.
and much of it becomes unconscious. So you have these unconscious biases which you use to discriminate and you're not even aware. If I may, I'd like to give you an example of this, which is one of the reasons actually why I'm so passionate about doing whatever I can to help. When I completed my PhD, I was hired by Xerox. And for about 3 months, I could not get on a very good project. I would discuss with my boss, he would explain. And then one day, a young white man joined the group. And within 1 week, he was placed on the most exciting project in research and development in Xerox at the time. I went to see my manager and he began the usual excuses. And suddenly I said to him, I said, Steve, don't think of me as though I'm Frank. Think of me as though I am Bob. And I was literally stunned to see the recognition in his face as he looked at me and he said, you know, you are right. Bob has only been here a week and I've put him on the artery project. Well, I was furious. I made it out of his office. I ran down to the office of the senior vice president to give him yet another example of how I was being discriminated against. Now, a couple of years later, I thought about that incident and realized a couple of things that I had missed. One of them was this senior vice president had hired 3 young Black PhDs that summer to join the one sole Black PhD that Xerox had at that time. So it probably was more important to him that Frank Douglas would do well than it was to Frank Douglas. The second thing I missed is what I call, what was my desired outcome? My desired outcome was not for the senior vice president to go and have tough words with my boss. It was to get a good project. So had I reframed the question and had I said, Dr. Tribus, could you help my boss to find me a good project? I might have retired from Xerox. Because one, that was in his sphere of influence. Can you imagine the senior vice president going to my bosses 3 levels down and simply saying, why don't you find a man a good project? Would have been done like yesterday. Okay. Yeah. So I missed that. And the second thing I missed is my desired outcome was to get a good project. And so, you know, as I was writing my memoirs, I wrote that incident, and it suddenly struck me that, as a matter of fact, in the rest of my career, I had learned from that incident. And what I often did when I was faced with discrimination issues is I reframed the problem. And so that led me to set up Safe Haven Dialogues and also to write the second book, which is entitled Addressing Systemic Discrimination, to reframe the problem, okay, or by reframing the problem. So it's become now, you know, my mission to teach this process.
Right. Well, you just brought up, you know, one of the things, because my husband, a Black man, obviously, was a police officer, and one of the things that he would talk about is they would promote the white people to sergeant and captain and all that, and he had his master's degree, and some of them didn't even have a bachelor's degree, and they would promote them, and that happens in a lot of places. So how can you reframe that? Are you talking about reframing the dialogue? Give me an example of how someone is listening and they're being passed over, discriminated against for promotions, and how would they reframe that?
I won't go through the whole process, but I'll give you an example. In the book, I actually have 18 examples which cover doctors and nurses, individuals from large companies, from government offices, etc. But I'll give you one example in the book. This actually is a man originally from Morocco, and he's working for a small company. He feels very indebted to the company because that company helped him to get his work visa. And he's been with the company for about 18 years. He also has a daughter who's about to go off to college. So having the income is extremely important to him. But he and the very small number of minorities who work in the company have been subjected to racist slurs, etc. He's complained about nothing. Then one day, in the interim, I should add, he had obtained 2 masters, one of which was in project management. He applied for a job that was posted in project management, did not get it. Someone from the outside was hired. He, of course, was very, furious, upset, went to complain to his boss, etc. The new man was not that strong in project management, and his boss asked him to help the new man in project management.
Wow.
But one of the things which we do, when we interview such individuals, we ask them what is their desired outcome. And one of his desired outcomes, he had outcomes like he wants the company to have no discrimination, was one of the outcomes. And one of the things we do is to determine, is it realistic, or is it realistic to occur within a reasonable time frame, etc. But one of them was to be recognized for his achievements and to be valued for it. So in the discussion, as we are looking at what we call what's a better problem to solve, we ask the question, what's your point of influence? And we got him to understand that his point of influence was the one which actually was most upsetting. Namely, his boss had asked him to help the new man. So what if you
didn't
went
give
to
him the
your
job,
boss?
right? It happens all the time, all the
It
time.
does, and we have a number of
Yes.
such cases.
Yes, yes.
So, we said to him, what if you went to your boss and did the following? And tell your boss that you would like to offer, without charge, lessons in project management to any of your co-workers who would like to do that. Okay. Do you think any of them would sign up? He said, yes, it's an issue, all the time, project management. I said, well, you want to be recognized. Your boss actually has recognized you. It's not in a way you want to be recognized. Your boss has recognized you for your achievement by asking you to.
Right.
Now, if you go and ask your boss and he says yes, and you start training the others, you suddenly have elevated yourself on how you're being seen. And now you have gathered allies, okay, to yourself. And now you can say to your boss, it would be really very helpful for the spirit of the group and for working well together if people respected each other and did not call each other, these stereotypical names. Then you can have that discussion. And then there are other discussions that you can have, which we go into. But that's the reframing. You reframe it from, okay, I have been passed over to, I would like to use that which I have to make the team better. And
that's good. That's good. Yes. But a lot of people just doing their angry and hate and all that stuff. You're right. You're saying to reframe it, and but in order for you to reframe it, you've got to understand it's systemic. You got to understand, and you've got to be able to work with the system. And you're right. Anything, even your marriage, if you reframe it, is going to work better for you. But a lot of times, when somebody does you wrong, your emotions get in the way, and you don't handle the problem properly because you're all hot-headed and angry.
Well,
Right?
in fact,
So,
the feedback
that's a good
that
way.
we're getting, and in September, actually, I'll be doing a workshop for a group of directors who approached me and said, look, we don't think we have a discrimination problem. but we have a lot of conflicts. And as we read your book and we read some of the cases, we think your process could be used for conflict resolution. Would you be willing to do a workshop? So I said, well, send me 2 or 3 cases and let me look at it and let me put it in the format. Probably have to use different words, but use the same format and then send it back to you and see if it makes sense. And so here we are going to have a workshop. I also got a testimonial from 2 people, actually. One is an associate vice president at the university, and I was doing a book signing at that university. And she came up to me and said, I use your method of reframing in my staff meeting where I had a problem with a couple of individuals who were having real difficulty. And it really worked.
Yeah.
And talking about the marriage situation,
yes.
I have a former student of mine when I was at MIT who sent me this letter telling me that she used the reframing approach to solve a family issue. And now they're all happy
Well,
about
I
it.
just told you, it is amazing. I mean, I know it can work anywhere because yes, you're dealing with your husband, you're dealing with your family members, you're dealing with your friends, you're dealing with coworkers. These are all people. Now, when you're dealing with racism or discrimination from your boss or from companies, then to me, it's even harder there, but you can reframe all the time in interpersonal situations.
The trick, if you like, in the organization, in the company, and we talk about finding a better problem to solve to help you to get to your desired outcome. So you have to be clear about the desired outcome. Okay. Now, a better problem to solve is a problem whose solution not only satisfies or helps you to get to your desired outcome, but makes your team better. Yeah. So it is not only good for you, it's good for your team. Yes. When you find that and you go to have a dialogue with your boss, instead of your boss being very defensive that, you're going to talk about how you're being discriminated against, is that the discussion is, here I have an idea how I and the team could do better. Yeah. And you have that discussion. And your boss will get the aha. But then you could say to him, and if we did this and the team is being more productive, I too would become more productive and it would solve this problem that I have. Yes, yeah. It's a different dialogue altogether, but the focus is the aggrieved, we like to use the term, the aggrieved individual becoming motivated and improving the productivity of their team. Because not only are they motivated, but team members are also motivated. I like that. And the example you give of training someone is actually a very good one. Or, when I was in the corporate world, they're saying that you can also volunteer for extra work and volunteer to do extra things so that, people can see what you're capable of. And you're right, solving a bigger problem. So yeah, so what happens if you've done all that, and like you said, the systemic discrimination is so unconscious that you're just helping other people get promoted and you're still the same way? Well, no, then you have to address it. Okay. See, one of the things that happens is that people don't address it because, one, they are very angry, appropriately so. So they can't have the type of dialogue in which their manager would listen, etc. Okay, so this helps them to have that dialogue. We empower them in a real sense to have that dialogue. And the system starts off with helping them to be clear on their desired outcome, helping them to understand from a viewpoint of inclusion and equity the issues in their environment and the issues in their situation so that they understand those. and we actually plot what we call our equity, inclusion, culture matrix, because equity and inclusion really drive the culture and subcultures in organizations.
Mhm.
So if you understand that, people are not feeling they belong, are not being recognized, are not being included. And if you recognize the things that are happening to them that they're experiencing, and you can identify it, or the systems, how are people promoted? How are people recognized? What are the prospects for an individual? Are there privileged groups, etc.? That's on the equity side.
Mhm.
And you do that and you plot a matrix and you see where that individual is in that matrix, just the typical 2x2 matrix with 4 quadrants. Then you can ask the question, where are your points of influence that could help you to find a better problem to solve to get to your desired outcome?
Okay. So it's all a
The
work in progress,
reason,
right?
yeah, but the reason for the process is we cannot expect something that has been around for ages, that have become systemic part of the system, in which often well-meaning individuals are not even aware that they're doing it. There are many who are
You're telling
purposely
me
doing
that
it.
they're not aware that there's a Black man that can do, or a female, or a Latino, or whatever discrimination that can do the job better, but you give it to the white male or the white person. You're telling me that they're not aware of that?
I'm telling you that there are cases. No, I'm telling you there are cases where they are aware that that person may be able to do it as well as, but not better. And
Better.
the
Okay.
reason is they're accustomed to seeing the white male do it. So all of their experience tells them that the white male will be able to do it. They feel they're
Got it.
taking a risk when a Black person does it, and the first one will do it, or a female will do it. One of the things, and I had the opportunity of sitting in the C-suite, being on the board of management, and we would have these discussions, our succession planning, where we would have, as you know, you've been in the corporate world, so we have individuals, we will discuss them, what's their potential for rising up in the organization, how long would it take them to get to a certain point, what would they need to get there. And ever so often I would make the observation that when it is a white male who has deficits, the discussion is, well, could we get him a personal coach? Or could we perhaps have him run a small group for a short time, get his sea legs, and then give him the larger group? We are prepared to allow that person to fail. When it comes to a woman, and in my case, it was mainly women because there were very, very few minorities, unfortunately. When it came to women, they had to be already doing the job before you would even consider them as a potential candidate.
Yeah. Wow. You're bringing up some
And
good
so
points.
initially, the question you had, first faced with it, I was, convinced that this was just intentional. As I got to know some of my colleagues extremely well and had discussions and and this is one of the things of the Xerox episode, was to see the recognition come in his face, which told me that although he was doing this, he didn't even recognize he was doing it.
Yes.
And so they are those individuals whom, when they recognize, then they alter behavior. There are others, however, who know that that's what they're doing, that's what they intend to do. You have a different dialogue with them.
Right. One of the first interviews I had on my show years ago was this guy that was telling me that people actually believed that the Black person is not intellectually as superior as the white man. So when you just said that they never even consider that, the Black person or the woman can do better than a white male, and it's very deep in their subconscious that they feel that way, then yes, I see that we've got to start digging the ditch, showing, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on the social media, and everybody is always celebrating first Black woman, first Black man, first Black whatever. And I'm thinking, we're in 2023. Why are we still having first? And that's because, people didn't think that we had the capability of doing it. So yes, they know that the Black person has the capability of strength and athletic performance and those things, because, more than 50% of the athletes are like Black, right? But as far as our intellectual capacity, maybe they don't feel that we're there. So,
and the unfortunate thing is we have to celebrate those firsts, not because we think that we have achieved something, but because we think that the white population has certainly achieved something. Namely, they have achieved the beginning of the recognition that there are lots of Blacks out there who can do this. And this is just the first of many who are there. I mean, I used to tell people when they tell me, you must be so proud that you're the first. I said, no, I went to school with people who were as capable, if not more capable than I am. And I know Black people now who are as capable, if not more capable than I am. So it is something that is difficult for me to celebrate. If Black people celebrate it, it actually has meaning for me, because they are dealing with, we have overcome a bit.
Yeah.
And I have been a part of that I can celebrate.
Well, I understand that part. My problem with it is, we have been doing the civil rights thing since the 60s. Why is it that we're still getting the first Black person to do this and the first Black person to do this in the 2023? I have no problem celebrating, right? I'm just thinking it's ridiculous.
Well, it's worse. I was asked a question on a podcast, as a matter of fact, since I came in 63 and now, what do I think about America? And I said, when I came in 63, I was aghast, because in Guyana, America was, this place, was honey flowing, and people were very rational and made rational decisions, etc. And I came, and there's racism and people are irrational. And then I said, and then Jim Jones happened.
Yeah.
So there's cultism in America, and where do they take the cults? They take them to Guyana, the Jim Jones situation. So for me, this was just incredible. However, I lived through the 60s and the 70s and saw the improvements, the 60s and the 70s. Today, however, in my view, it is worse than it was in the 60s for the following reason. Now we have individuals unashamedly stating their racist views and their discrimination views. Right now, I'm sitting in Florida. You have a governor, who is trying to rewrite the history books.
Yeah.
Who is forcing colleges to change their curricula because it doesn't fit his white supremacist view.
Yeah.
It's gotten worse.
That is bad, though. That is bad. Yep.
The worst part of it, I must say, as I said on this show when I was asked the question, is here's the thing that I find very strange. These individuals are saying they would like to have the 10 commandments placed on the wall of walls of in every room in the schools. Now, here's what I learned when I was in the evangelical church. And one of the disciples asked Christ, "What is the greatest commandment?" And Christ said, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart." And without breaking or pausing, he continued. And the second is like unto it, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself."
Yeah.
If you're a follower of Christ and you're not doing that, and you're hating your neighbor, where is the Christ in all of this Christianity?
I will tell you
And
that they didn't get
now,
that one. That does not happen here.
well, interestingly enough, recently I learned that there are actually Christians who are saying that Christ was wrong. He was too liberal. That is actually happening now. So a lot of this is becoming cults.
Yeah.
And that to me it's hard for me to believe, because I grew up looking at America as,
I know.
land of,
Yeah, when you're a third world
the free
country,
and the brave,
everybody wants to come to America. It's still the land of opportunity, and it's still the superpower, and still everybody wants to come here and all of that, because if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. That's the line in Pretty Woman. But yes, it's not, the streets are not paved for gold and all that. You got to work hard. You got to put up with a lot of discrimination. You got to if you're not the, I think I was watching a movie the other day, and the guy says, "I should get the job because I'm a white male," because now they're thinking that the white males are being discriminated against and all this. Didn't they not just knock down affirmative action? I mean, it's really ridiculous, right?
No, it's really very sad.
Yes.
And I guess one of the things when I came to America, I know the first few years when I was so puzzled by all of this. I thought there would be the philosophers and the sociologists, okay, and the certain physicians and certain scientists, and certain of the historians, and religious leaders, and they would get together and discuss these difficult issues that we have in the society, and discuss them openly, so that everybody could hear and understand the different views, etc. And very little or none of that is happening. So again, it makes me
well,
really
I think it's not
sad for our
happening
country.
because it is all about capitalists, and the rich wants to get richer. So they don't care who they throt on, and who they throt on are the minorities, the Black and the females, and if you put in female and minority, the Latinos, Black and brown people. Let's put it that way. So that's why they're not discussing it, because they're patting their pockets. Yes. All right. So this is an amazing conversation. I'm loving it. My husband keeps telling me a lot of times, "Oh, you're from Canada. You didn't see racism and you didn't see discrimination." And he's right. I didn't come to the United States until I was 40. So, and I'm a female, right? So I wasn't soaked in it. But as a Black male, he sees it and he understands it. So your work is important, because what it's doing, it's giving us the tools to play in this situation. And your concept of reframing, I mean, I'm sure it works more times than it doesn't. So talk about your book. The title is amazing. It's called Defining Moments of a Free Man from a Black Stream. What does that mean?
Interestingly enough, it's my name. It turns out that Frank is Celtic and means free mason or free man, and Douglas is Scottish and means from a Black stream. So it's defining moments of the life of Frank Douglas. So I talk
Okay.
about the defining moments as a child growing up in Guyana,
Yes, yeah.
defining moments in the college and the university and medical school, and defining moments in academia and in industry.
Yes. Well, I love it. I mean, and listen, if you're gonna, these days a title is so important. So I love the title, but I can understand the Black stream part.
Well,
All right. So,
I tell you how I found this out.
okay.
It's because I was working at Xerox, and
Okay.
this was the end of the 60s, 1970. I say actually it was 71. And at that time, I had a large afro, a big beard, and wore a dashiki and sandals. And
Aw,
I used to
yes.
collaborate with one lab, and one of the technicians in that lab was Scottish. So when I decided that I was to leave, and I was going to different individuals with whom I'd worked to say my goodbyes, etc. This Scotsman said, Dr. Douglas, do you know what your name means? And I looked at him and I said, no. And then he told me. And he said, and you walk around here like a free man from a black stream. And that's what your name means. So I then went and checked the Webster dictionary, the names at the back of it, names, meaning of names. And he was absolutely right. That's what it says.
I love it though. I love it. And look at it. You make it the title of your book. And I'm pretty sure everybody asked you about that. So that's amazing. All right, so let's talk about your book. We have discussed, I normally ask the question, why did you write it? But you've explained that. So what do you want people to get out of it? I'm pretty sure the reframing is one of your top resources. But I understand you have 3 principles. Do you want to share them now?
Yes. Well, they're now 2 books. The first one, The Defining Moments of a Free Man from the Black Stream, are my memoirs, which cover from Guyana to, to at that time I was I had left MIT, but it covered a great part of my life. But during the writing of that book, as I told the story, which I told you about Xerox, I recognized that, as a matter of fact, that the way I handled situations and challenges of discrimination is that I reframed. Now, in 2020, as we all were, I was riveted to the TV looking at the murder of George Floyd. And something occurred to me. Here were the onlookers doing everything they could to get Chauvin to take his knee off of George Floyd's neck without any success. But in all of this, there was one person who was suffering, who was being murdered. It was George Floyd. And I reflected back on discrimination in my experience, whether personally or helping others. And there was always an individual. And although we have these great programs of diversity, equity, inclusion, which bring sensitivity and try to get people to understand the microaggressions and the importance of microaggressions and sensitize managers, etc., we do very little for the aggrieved individual. So I set up the group in September of 2020. I set up a group which is called Safe Haven Dialogues, for it to be a safe place where individuals could come and tell their story. And we empower them to have a dialogue with their managers. And so here are the principles. Principle number 1 is we focus on the individual to empower that individual. Principle number 2, we look at the organization from a viewpoint of equity and inclusion. Equity are those rules, regulations that are formed by the leaders of an organization, in which they say this is how this organization will work. here are the guardrails, here are the things we expect you to do, here's how you get promoted, etc. That's the equity side. The inclusion side are those behaviors that are fostered by the frontline manager and the co-workers. Behaviors which help you feel you belong to the team, behaviors where your work is recognized, you are valued, your opinions are valued. So in any organization, you have these two things. Now, diversity gets us in the door. But once we're in the door, we are now faced with the issues, the other issues of systemic, now it's in the system discrimination. So the second principle is understanding the issues of equity and inclusion in an organization as they impact an individual. And the third principle is the reframing. And by doing that is finding a better problem to solve, which enables the aggrieved individual to achieve their desired outcome as well as improving the team productivity. So those are the three principles.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yes. Well, listen, you're doing good work. I saw on LinkedIn that you were also talking to Jack Canfield, which is top guy. So I'm glad that your work is getting recognized.
Yeah, no, I was actually, I must say, I was really quite delighted. I was one of 17 authors who were in a 2-day workshop that Jack Canfield and Steve Harrison held. And what was powerful about that workshop is that we sent our book to them, way ahead of time. And in those 2 days, we each got a certain amount of time in which they critiqued our book and gave us suggestions of how to promote and to market. And Jack Canfield also offered at the end of the 2 days to do a 2-minute interview, if we so desired, and gave us the permission to use that interview to promote the book. And I was just so delighted with the offer, of course, because we all know Jack Canfield, co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yep. Very successful.
In fact, yes, in fact, what I didn't know until recently, that only the Bible has sold more books than Jack Canfield.
Chicken Soup for the Soul. Yeah.
Well, not only that, he has about 7 bestsellers, and he's sold over 600 million books altogether. Yes. So when Jack Canfield
tells you to do something, yes, then you do it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the marketing strategies is definitely podcast. So I'm pretty sure that he probably or somebody had told you to do it. And that's one way to get your book, what you're doing now. You're bringing attention to your work, and so that's amazing. So yes, so thank you so much for being on the show, and love seeing my fellow Guyanese person, being successful and talking about my country, and I get to talk about my school and where I grew up, and it's always good. Yes. And I'll send this interview to my dad.
Yes, get your father on the show.
Sorry?
Get your father on the show, and I would love to be introduced to him.
Okay, yes, I'll definitely introduce you to. Yeah, but you made me think about having my father come on the show and tell his story, because he's got a good story.
Yes.
Yes. All right.
And
well,
also, if I may say, one of the things which I will be doing after September is actually visiting churches to tell the story, because one of the things people don't recognize, for example, about 2-3 months ago, Boston University published a study in which they had followed 48,000 Black women for 22 years. And what they found was that the Black women who reported episodes of racism, either at work or from the police or in dealing with housing, had 26% higher incidence of coronary heart disease.
Ooh, ooh,
And one of the things which,
what a connection.
being a physician myself, I'm very much concerned also about the impact that systemic discrimination has on stress, of individuals. And so bringing this message to church members, who of course deal with stress at work, is something which I will be doing
Wow.
in September.
Oh,
So
that's
if
good.
there's an opportunity
I
to
felt
visit,
that one
there, I
because
would,
the
yeah,
Black woman has a lot of things that she has to deal with. You know, you're talking about the Black man being discriminated at work, but the Black female is being discriminated in a lot of places. And yeah, I felt that resonate with me. So yes, so that's good. I'm honored to showcase your work and to give you an audience. And yes, so tell our listeners how they can get a copy of your book. Tell us if you're on social media so we can follow, so we can, so they can, follow you and understand some of the things that you're doing to highlight this situation.
you can get my book. It's entitled Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem. And you can get it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. You can contact me at safehavendialogues-llc.com, safehavendialogues-llc.com. So if you write to contact at safehavendialogues@llc.com, you can contact me.
Okay. All right. Well, I will add that information to our show notes. I will have a transcript of my conversation with Dr. Douglas on the show page, which is blog.myhelps.us. And I will link out to his book and his website so that anybody that wants to connect with him will be able to do that. So, did I get something wrong here? Because I have your book called Defining Moments of a Free Man from a Black Stream. That's one book. And then
That's
the other
one
book
book.
is
That's
called
the first book. The second one,
okay.
the second one is the Addressing Systemic Discrimination. And that's the one that I'm focused on right now. And that's the one that has the process, the reframing process.
Okay, all right. So I'm glad you corrected me in that. So Addressing Systemic Discrimination. All right. So you can send me the link to that to make sure I get it correctly, or I'll just search under your name and find that and link out to it. Yep. Amazing. Awesome. Well, yes, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Thank you so much for the work that you do. I learned a few things. I'll definitely get your book too, because like you said, reframing can work in so many different situations, and communication skills are very, very important in every avenue of your life. So I'll pick up a copy of your book as well, just to I'm not in corporate America anymore, so I'm not really dealing with this on a daily basis, but the reframing and reframing the dialogue is something that we can all benefit from. So thanks again for being on the show. Now, any last words before we wrap up?
No, I'd just like to thank you for having given me the opportunity to share my passion and my present mission.
Yes, thank you. And as I told you before, as soon as you came on the show, I'm saying that your resemblance to my dad is also uncanny. So,
so I have to meet him.
Yeah, so it's amazing. So thank you so much. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life. Today, we're talking about transforming your mind on discrimination and racism, and how you can change your mindset, change your dialogue in order to make it happen for you. And one of the things that Dr. Douglas said is you understand what's your outcome, right? So what is it that you want to happen? It's like any coaching. What do you want to happen? And if you go about it from that angle, then, and not from an angle of anger, which is the first place we go, when we feel that we're being treated unfairly. And you work the problem, and you work it by reframing it. So you guys, if you're in corporate America and this discussion, you feel that it's relevant to you, then definitely go pick up a copy of Dr. Douglas' book. Like I said, I'll link out to it in the show notes, and learn how you can elevate your world and your life and your career. So thanks again, Dr. Douglas. And until next time, namaste.
Okay, thank you very much.